the last administration by bringing in drugs, by human trafficking, by sex trafficking, by everything you can think of. One criminal network attracts another criminal network, and they almost run the border like it's almost like a toll booth. So all other criminal entities got to pay money to them in order to operate. But they control, like I said, they've worked in over 165 different countries in the world. During the Biden administration, they registered that the U.S. Border Patrol arrested people from 168 different countries. So you can put two and two together on that end on how they're able to bring so many individuals here and who's operating where.
Folks, this is Tim Sundles with Buffalo Bore Ammunition. And we have a special guest today, somebody that has, in my opinion, done more to free this country and serve this country and help this country than most people will ever even have the chance to. This is Art Del Cueto. And Art was, for years, the VP of the National Border Patrol Union, and he became an advisor to President Trump on border issues. And he also tour guided President Trump on, border patrols or border tours. And Art came to us 8 months ago when we were in Africa. We started doing these videos, and Art's a gun nut. Art hasn't told me that, but when Art talks about guns, you can tell Art's a total gun nut. And he contacted us, and I knew the name anyway because I had seen Art they were either campaign events or some kind of televised event with President Trump. So I knew who you were, basically, without knowing who you were.
Right.
But, Art, this country's in my opinion, you can feel free to correct me. I'm going to turn this over to you in a second, but I feel like this country's in great jeopardy. We have massive drug cartels that have been given free rein to cross the border. They're no longer really drug cartels. They're human traffickers or anything else that'll make a buck. They're heartless. They're basically very organized gangs. And when you and I spoke last night, you mentioned the Sinaloa cartel, and that they were active in 165 countries. What do you see going on in this country with organized crime? Because that's all a cartel is.
Right.
Organized crime. Tell me what you see going on with the human trafficking and the murders and the drug trafficking.
Well, look, Tim, first off, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. You know what? I'm no longer with the council, but I guess maybe that should be my new title is, Art Del Cueto gun nut, right? And you're absolutely right. I am a gun nut. I love guns. I've loved them. I grew up around them with my dad. It's always been a big deal. The Second Amendment, as we talked off air, is a huge deal to me. And it's fantastic, and I've instilled the same thought pattern in my children. I have my daughter's 12, so I've always and she loves guns now. She can call out AR-15s and AKs and knows the difference between several different guns. And she's a 12-year-old. Sometimes to not the happiest of times to other people that are around us sometimes, but I don't care. I'm teaching my kids the right way. I have an older son who's probably as big of a gun nut, if not bigger of a gun nut than me. When in fact, he was very excited that I was going to come on with you because he's actually a fan of yours as well. And he's like, "Oh yeah, no, I have some of his ammo," which is kind of cool. But I'm really thrilled to be on here, and I'm fortunate enough to have been able to be very vocal for a long time. A little bit about myself. I was born in Mexico. I derived citizenship through my father, who was a U.S. citizen, but my home wasn't a typical home. I guess like others that I would see around the neighborhoods or in different towns where they were proud of where they came from, but at the same time where they're here. And my family, we were proud of where we came from, but we realized that we left and came here to form a better life. So my dad never allowed any other flag to be flown in our home but the American flag. It was, hey, be proud of where you came from, but we're here for a reason. My dad used to say this to us all the time, and he'd say, look, if the country we left was as good as some of these people say it was, then we never would have left. So that was always something that my dad spoke to us. I grew up on the border my entire life, and I saw the differences in individuals that will cross into the country legally or illegally. And when you're a child, you grow up and you watch different police shows or cowboy movies, or you want to be a fireman or a baseball player or different things. I grew up on the border and I saw Border Patrol all the time, right? And they wore the cowboy hat and they rode the horses. So I thought to myself, well, that's the best of both worlds. You're like a cop and a cowboy at the same time. So it was a big deal to me to join the Border Patrol. Before the Border Patrol, I worked some time as a wildland firefighter down in Cochise County in Arizona on the border itself. Then I worked for the state prison at a maximum security prison for a long time. And then I made the jump, and when I was able to get picked up by the Border Patrol, I worked for Border Patrol for almost 23 years. And in that time, I was a representative of the union. I was able to be very vocal. I handled most of the media on that end. So I saw all the different issues with the media. And I was able to just tell people the truth and explain to people, the differences. I started during the Bush administration. So I went through the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, now back with, the Trump administration. And I've never seen the border as secure as it is now, but it's through rhetoric and internal policies that were there. President Trump basically looked at the laws and said, let's enforce these laws upon these people. But people need to realize it could all go away with a flick of a switch. And that's where the problem is. Excuse me?
One more election, it can be gone.
Yeah, it could all be gone. And that's why we need to be very, very aware of not just who's the president, but local politicians. And when I start looking at what's happening in America, I think we've become complacent on just leaning everything towards the federal government and leaning everything towards the president of the United States and saying, well, he's fixed it, he's going to take care of it. But if you don't have the right local leadership, you don't really have it taken care of. I live in Tucson, Arizona, and it doesn't say, they don't call it a sanctuary city, but they adhere to all the sanctuary city policies. So what's the difference? If you're still doing that, I mean, you're still creating that magnet. And we're so close to the border. We're in a state, we're in Arizona, which is a border state that is very lenient with a lot of the laws that we've had. I think the world focuses on Texas because they're fortunate enough to have a governor that allows law enforcement and everyone to do their job more thoroughly. In Arizona, there's still a lot of pushback. And just south of the border, 45 minutes from where I'm sitting, is where the Sinaloa cartel operates in Mexico. And as we had talked about before, the Sinaloa cartel works in 165 different countries. That's where they have connections. Are they a terrorist organization? I believe they should be considered a terrorist organization, but I don't want people to look at groups like Al Qaeda and ISIS, and when you see them with their faces covered up in the middle of the desert and just running around, this terrorist organization of the drug cartels, they run everything like a Fortune 500 company. I mentioned that I was born in Mexico, but I derived citizenship from my parents. A lot of these individuals that are running the cartels now, they were actually born in the United States. And because their families, through drug trade, have acquired billions and billions of dollars, they've sent their kids to top universities in the United States, top universities throughout the world. So they bring a business aspect to the drug cartels, and that's how they run it. Albeit if you cross them, obviously they're going to behead you, but they run it like a true Fortune 500 company. They have an endless budget. They made billions upon billions of dollars the last administration by bringing in drugs, by human trafficking, by sex trafficking, by everything you can think of. One criminal network attracts another criminal network, and they almost run the border like it's almost like a toll booth. So all other criminal entities got to pay money to them in order to operate. But they control, like I said, they've worked in over 165 different countries in the world. During the Biden administration, they registered that the U.S. Border Patrol arrested people from 168 different countries. So you can put two and two together on that end on how they're able to bring so many individuals here and who's operating where. It's a mess. And unless we get things done right moving forward with proper elections of local officials and the proper bills and laws passed, it could all go. How secure it is now can go away overnight. And then I look at it and I think, how secure are we really? The drug cartels, they're able to come up with new tactics on how to bring drugs across. It used to be marijuana, it used to be cocaine. Now you can bring fentanyl, a small amount, and you cut it and you make so much more fentanyl. So the profit is bigger gains, and at the same time it's easier because you can package it smaller. I was just in Maine, and I don't want to alarm people. I don't say I want to fearmonger. I want to alert the American public. We need to remain vigilant. I was in Maine, Tim, and there's no barrier in Maine. There's absolutely no barrier. And yeah, it's Canada, but a lot of the property south of Canada in the U.S., right on the border, it's owned by a lot of the Amish people, and they allow Border Patrol to patrol in that area. So you would think, okay, well, you still have patrol, but when you start stacking up those areas of the border with federal agents, where do you want these federal agents to live? There's nowhere to live. It's Amish country, obviously. So agents, if you get a young agent, 22, 23 years old, and you say, hey, I'm going to have you patrol the northern border. Okay, where am I going to live? I'm going to live 2 hours away, first and foremost, from where my station is going to be. There's no schooling for if I decide to have a family. The guy, if they don't have a girlfriend, they're not going to be able to find one in some of those parts of the country. And your girlfriend ain't going to stay with you long because there's nothing for them to do as well. It's very difficult to make sure that you get the right resources in a lot of these areas. And I think that's what makes it even harder moving forward.
So explain, if you can, how entrenched just the Sinaloa cartel is in America. I mean, this isn't their headquarters, is it? Or has it become their headquarters in America?
I think the Sinaloa cartel has a headquarter in all 65 countries that they're linked to be honest. I know that's horrible to say, but I believe that because I've seen it. We see the videos, we see the groups. They're not shy about it. Right now, you're seeing a lot of the issues with the protest with the Antifa groups. So that's kind of taken the limelight or the focus on some of these cartels away a little bit. But they operate in different parts of the United States. You see it. There's a lot of money that gets sent out of the country. That's something that I've always been very vocal about. Is we're so good at securing the southern border right now with what's coming in and all these issues. We need to start securing it and seeing what's going out. I don't think there's anything wrong with setting up checkpoints near the border and seeing how much money is being taken out, seeing if there's weapons being taken out of the United States. They're embedded here. You see it all the time, and it's frustrating. Obviously, with the drugs that are being passed around in the United States, and I'll give you an example. Back during the first Trump administration, a single pill of fentanyl was going for right around $1.25 on the streets in the United States. During the Biden administration, fentanyl pills were going for as low as 15 cents a pill. Now, that just shows the amount that was able to be brought into the U.S., and they're going to protect their assets. They're going to protect their money. So they're going to have numerous amounts of individuals in the United States making sure that they protect their assets. So the cartels, the Sinaloa cartels, the Guadalajara, Jalisco cartel, they're very much embedded in our neighborhoods in the United States today.
So, as depressing as that is, this is really important. I mean, this is important news. These are facts that I. It's why we wanted you to come on. You know, I can deal with the devil I know. I
Right.
can't. I cannot deal with what I don't know. And you know, part of our job, that when Kim and I started doing these podcasts and all these videos and creating a social media image for ourselves, our goal was to educate the public about laws, about guns, the proper use of guns, about our politics. I don't know how anybody can be into guns and not be aware of politics. I mean, if there was no guns, America wouldn't even exist in the first place. You know, we shot the hell out of King George III and sent
Right.
his people, you know, back to Europe. So, I can you explain to me on the human trafficking? Because to me, this is the most egregious and the most disgusting of all the things that cartels and organized crime are involved in. When they bring humans into America to basically to sell them, are these people coming from all over the world, like Ukraine? I understand there's massive human trafficking going on, you know, through Ukraine. Or are they all coming, you know, Mexico, Central America, South America? Where are the people coming from, and how are they kidnapped?
Okay, so the main corridor, Tim, and that's a great question. So the main corridor has always been, the southern border of Mexico. As we said, look, the drug cartels, they're involved in the human trafficking element now, and they work with different countries around the world. So you have to make the deal with those individuals. Look, when Colombia was bringing in all the cocaine, they would make deals in the United States, and they would bring the cocaine with the drug dealers, obviously not with the government, and they would bring the drugs in through different areas. And then the Mexican farmers at the time that were farming the marijuana, and they got smart, and they started building money and an empire, and gathering guns and their own militias, and taking care of themselves and their loads. And they realized, look, Colombia's got to go through Mexico in order to get to the United States. So they started strong arming Colombia. They went into cartel wars with Colombia to the point of they said, look, now we're the top dogs. You got to come through us. You can't just bring stuff through Mexico and bring it into the United States. You have to pay a toll through us. So that's when the Mexican cartels started expanding their criminal networks. They started going to other countries and expanding in other countries with the drug trade. Because they kept on making more and more money, billions upon billions. And then they realized human trafficking it's a money-making thing. And I think what they deal with, which makes it even easier sometimes than bringing some of the drugs, is you can use human trafficking almost as, a diversion. So what they would do is they would bring individuals from all over the world. They would cross them with what they call coyotes, which, that's the main guy that crosses the groups, the illegal aliens that are coming into the United States. Now, sometimes you would send dummy loads, knowing that Border Patrol would go after these big loads. They would get turned in. A lot of those groups that we caught during the dummy loads were individuals that really didn't have a criminal record or any criminal background. So what we would do many times is we would call what's called a voluntary return. You would arrest them, bring them to your station, fingerprint them. They didn't have a record, and then you just sent them back. But we're talking about groups of 100 plus. So when you're a Border Patrol agent and you're catching these 100 plus groups, it's all hands on deck trying to transport them back to the station. I used to work in an area called the Tohono O'odham Native American Reservation, which is in Arizona on the border. This reservation expands within the U.S. and Mexico, and you're looking at 60 linear miles with the Mexican border. The reservation is roughly the size of the state of Connecticut. So it's a big area, and because you're on the res, you would have to drive almost 2.5 hours to the station to process these groups. So you can just imagine, when you catch a group of 100 plus and there's 6 guys on shift, it's going to take our shift to transport these individuals back to the station. That's what the drug cartels would utilize to distract agents and have them preoccupied with that. And that's when they would bring the drugs in, because there's no one else watching the border at that time. So they were bringing the drugs in, making money off of that. They're also bringing in individuals that now do have criminal record, and you're stuck with the 100 plus that you know you're just going to send back to Mexico, and they'll cross again tomorrow. So that was the whole cat and mouse game that the drug cartels know how to utilize. They made a ton of money with that, and they realized, hey, we can work hand in hand, smuggling whatever we want on this border, and we're the ones that are going to make money. So you would see groups from all over the world that you would arrest and you would detain. Some groups pay more money than others, and it just depends on where they're from, who they made the deal with. But you were looking at individuals that were paying $15,000, $20,000 to come across the border, when you would get individuals from China or from Brazil, from Ukraine, from all over the world, from the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. So you'd get them from everywhere. And, you fast forward and you go on to the last administration, where all of a sudden it was easier. And well, let me take a step back though. So like I said, they were charging $5,000, $15,000 to come across. That would cover them into the United States. They would put them in a stash house, and then they would detain them there until the coast was clear, and they would take them out of that stash house and send them to different parts of the United States in groups of 5 or 6 or whatever they could fit in a vehicle, and just transport them many times through highways. So that's how they would do it for $15,000 a pop. You fast forward to the Biden administration, and it got easier, because they realized as soon as they crossed into the United States, the illegal alien, all he had to do was say political asylum. And the Biden administration was allowing these individuals that would ask for political asylum to be released in the United States. You can wait here till your court date. Some would show up, some wouldn't. I'm not going to sit here and say, that they didn't show up. 2% showed up to their court date, though, Tim. And I get the argument all the time from a lot of individuals that want to discuss it with me and say, no, you're lying. The majority went to their initial court date. Well, they went to their initial court date because they were under arrest. The government was taking them to the court. They didn't have a choice. So, yeah, they went to their initial court date. I mean, I'm not going to deny it, but they wouldn't go to any more after that. So, but here's the difference. The drug cartels and the people that are in charge of the human smuggling element, they were still charging $10,000 to $15,000 per individual to come across. They didn't have the cost, though, of putting him in a stash house. They didn't have the cost of having guides go through the freeways trying to see where Border Patrol or other law enforcement was as a spotter. So the cost of their business, what they were putting in, went down, but the price for bringing him across stayed the same. That's why they were able to make so much money coming across. And yeah, a lot of these individuals, I mean, you see them. I get phone calls all the time and messages, and people send me messages and say, hey, we're seeing a lot of the Hispanic groups that are being arrested. Is that the majority of came across? And I think that's where my concern is. We had a large group of individuals from other countries that were smuggled under the 4 years of the Biden administration. And I think those groups are harder to find. A lot of it is because, and I hate to say it, but these groups that are being arrested, these targeted enforcement, I have friends that are on the front line still. They communicate with me everything that's going on. I see it. I still drive down to the border to see what's happening on our borders. I talk to all the agents. Is a lot of these groups that are being arrested, they're pointing the finger at their neighbors. They're pointing the finger at their places of business where they're working, and they're saying, hey, there's other illegal aliens working there. They're quick. I guess they're snitching off everyone, right? And everyone's upset, saying, "Oh, they're arresting, this certain demographic of individuals." Yeah, because you can't turn a blind eye. Are you arresting individuals that don't have a serious criminal background? Yes, but they're arresting them because the ones with the serious background are quick to point them out. And you can't sit there as a law enforcement officer and say, well, I'm not going to go arrest those people. No, you have to start an investigation, and then you're seeing businesses that have hired a lot of individuals that are here illegally. We saw it in California with the marijuana groves, where they actually had children out there working in those areas. You can't ignore that. So are there individuals that are being detained, arrested, and returned to their country that don't have a serious criminal background? Absolutely. But they're still illegally here, and those individuals need to get their day in court. And when they're receiving that day, they don't have a true asylum and they're getting deported. That's what it comes down to. There's an old quote that I've been saying for years. In fact, even President Trump used this quote in one of his State of the Union addresses, and I said it many years ago, and I continue to say, I close my door at night because I love the people inside, not because I hate the people outside. Our borders shouldn't be any different.
I can't I can't disagree with that. When humans are brought over the border specifically to be trafficked, how does that happen? I mean, who do they sell the person to? Who buys another human in America?
Right. A lot of those groups are the family that's already here. So a lot of those payments are made by family members that are already in the United States. You hear some of this, that some of them are indentured and everything, that indentured servants. There is a number that does do that. I think a lot of it is some of these areas where they use them for farming or, in different factories. Sometimes, a family member borrows money from whoever owns the business, and then they bring another family member into the United States, and then they slowly pay off the debt. But a lot of it sometimes is the family members themselves. They'll call their relative, they'll save the money, and they'll pay the different smuggling organizations to bring in another relative into the U.S. illegally. That's basically how it works all the time.
Wow, that is
It's horrible. It's horrible. And I'll tell you what's even worse is during the Biden administration, day one. I got to share this story with you. Day one of the Biden administration, the day he was supposed to take the oath, we had a group of 300 cross in one particular area. A lot of them were unaccompanied juveniles. And I remember one particular juvenile. He was from Central America. He was, I believe he was 12 years old, and he seemed to be the guy in charge, calling all the shots. I directed my conversation to a 15-year-old kid, also from Central America. I asked him that if he had his documentation with him. This 12-year-old child comes up to me. I'm in full uniform, Tim, okay? And I got other agents there with me. He comes up to me, and he tells me, if you need to talk to him, you need to go through me first. I kind of laughed, and I said, well, how old are you? And he says, I'm 12 years old. I said, are you in charge of the group? I mean, what's your role? I mean, he's a 12-year-old kid, right? And he says, I don't want to say I'm in charge. He goes, but definitely you need to talk to me before you talk to anyone else. And I said, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to Kansas City. My grandma's in Kansas City. I left my country, and now's the time to come. I said, where's your mom and dad? I said, he goes, you don't need to know where my mom and dad is. All I need to tell you is I'm going to Kansas City. This is the address I'm going. This is the phone number. And I told them, why now? And you got to remember, this is a 12-year-old child. And he looks at me straight in the eye. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't afraid. And he says, because I can come here now, and there's nothing you can do about it because your new president said I could do that. That's a 12-year-old child from Central America. Now, I've shared that story, and people ask me, are you scared of a 12-year-old child? I'm scared of what that 12-year-old child and the thousands upon thousands of other 12-year-old childs that have seen the world a different way, that they have a different mentality when it comes to how things should be done. I'm scared of those individuals in our school system coming after our 12-year-old children. That's what I'm scared of.
Me too, actually. The current administration is very, very committed to cleaning things up, but they have a battle 360 degrees around them. No matter what they do, they have to fight either other political groups, judges. They have to fight congressmen and senators. I just want America to be a safe, productive place for everyone who is a citizen, who is legally here. I'm not at all opposed to these work visa programs or any. I have a friend from South Africa that comes and works here for 8 months out of the year. And I've hunted with him in Africa, and he comes and works here and makes great money and provides great service for the farmers. I mean, he pretty much is the general manager of an entire large farming conglomerate. And I just think that's wonderful when everybody can help everybody. I have no troubles with anything like that. But the criminal element, and as you pointed out, what's going on with these children, they have a level of corrupt maturity the same as a 30-year-old.
Right.
I mean,
Absolutely.
they've been exposed to the elements, all the elements of crime, all the elements of risk. Those kids aren't afraid. It's just business.
Absolutely. You know, and the thing is, Tim, I think there's been a lot of back and forth talk, but we can't put the cart before the horse, right? And we saw it during, I mean, I saw it during the 86, during the amnesty of 86, during President Reagan's time, where, you know, we had the amnesty, but we didn't have, I think, all the proper elements in place to make sure that everything went smoothly. So, you know, a lot of individuals came in, they asked for asylum. As I said, I grew up on the border, so I saw it firsthand, right? I wasn't an adult at the time, but I was very much, you know, active in seeing what was going on in the border issues. And during the amnesty of 86, you have individuals that did not live in the United States, that did not work in the United States, and they would come into the U.S., they would pay a lot of these businesses $5,000-$6,000 so they could acquire paperwork telling them that they had worked at that business, and then they would go have their meetings. So a lot of people that even got amnesty in 86, they never should have gotten it. They weren't here. And then you had the people that should have gotten amnesty that couldn't afford to pay $5,000-$6,000 to the business that employed them. So those people ended up not getting, amnesty, and they were stuck in the same rut. So I think there's a lot of steps that people need to do to make forward. Just like I said, they'll use these big loads as a distraction to bring drugs in and the sex trafficking and individuals with more, higher level of crimes into the U.S. When we move forward and we have these visa programs and these worker programs, they need to make sure that they look at every single step. And you have to have the right guys in place. Look, I'm going to sound jaded here, Tim, right? But you're giving me the window, so I'm going to do it. I grew up on the border my whole life. I did 22 plus years with the Border Patrol. I've seen the different administrations. Like I said, I've grown up here. I have a level of street smarts, and I should say I have a level of border smarts because I grew up in the area and I saw everything that was going on with the crimes and everything whatsoever. But you have sometimes individuals that have spoken about border issues and border securities, and a lot of times it's individuals that, they were from the Midwest. They came out here and they worked in the border for 2-3 years, and all of a sudden they're touted as border experts. And I don't even consider myself a border expert, but I've always say it. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I've been in rooms where I look around and I know I'm not the dumbest one either, right? And so I see these guys that are touted as border experts and they have all these ideas and do this, do that. And I'm thinking, man, some of these guys don't get it. And I think moving forward, that's where my frustration is going to be. If we're moving forward and we're developing different policies of how we're going to protect our border and at the same time make it make sense, you got to make sure that you have individuals that have the knowledge policy-wise, but they need to have the knowledge street smarts-wise as well, because we're dealing with a criminal network that is generational. So whoever's running the cartels right now, their fathers ran it before them, their grandfathers before them, their uncles, their aunts, the whole family is involved in that. When you look at some law enforcement individuals, especially in the Border Patrol, and you ask them, what did your father do? A lot of them, they come from families that weren't involved in law enforcement. So, yeah, it's great. We're getting that knowledge, but we're dealing with individuals that have tons of knowledge because generations have passed it on and on and on. So they know how to smuggle. They know what to say. They know what to do. You look at the smuggling organizations during the Biden administration, they were utilizing minors to bring drugs across because they knew that it was harder to prosecute the minor. Then they started using drug addicts because they realized that it was going to be hard to prosecute the drug addicts. And a lot of the prosecutors, they didn't want to prosecute these guys because now they knew that once you arrested the drug addicts, you were going to have to incarcerate them. You were going to have to provide, some type of, health benefit for them while they're incarcerated because they're full-blown addicts. So the drug cartels, they know who to utilize to bring across. When you're seeing them bring humans, when they're smuggling humans into the country, they knew that once Border Patrol showed up, everyone would run in different places. Well, how do you prove who the coyote was? And it's what, you go back to the movie Training Day. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. If you arrested a group, and I'll give it to you a simple one, you'll understand it. If you get a group of individuals and all the people in that group are from Brazil and from Ukraine, okay? And one of the individuals in that group is from Mexico. One, who's your smuggler, Tim? Who's your coyote? Right?
Obviously the Mexican.
Right. But the prosecutions would say, you need to get two people from that group to admit that that's the coyote. You'd never get two people from that group. And so you would never prosecute the guy and you would send them back south. The drug cartels know that. That's why it was so much easier to bring in human smuggling, because you can disguise yourself as one of the illegals as opposed to disguising yourself as one of the bundles of drugs.
So the cartels essentially take massive advantage of the humanity in Americans and in American laws and procedures. I mean, we have this thing called the Constitution that says what we can and can't do, or what government can and can't do to illegals, et cetera, and it's filled with humanity. It's filled with care for other humans, and that's what they exploit.
Absolutely, and that's what it is. Look, it comes down to a lot of the laws. We need to figure them out. I look at the drone incursions that continuously happen on our southern border. You got these drones that come in, and there's policies in place. So if you're an agent working on the border and a drone comes across, and they come across all the time, and a lot of them are 5-6 feet above your head. That's how close they are, and they're gathering intel and they're seeing everything that's going on. You can't shoot the drone down, Tim. There's laws that prevent you from shooting it down. So what you have to do...
Not all laws are moral, and not all morality is legal.
So what agents are having to do in a situation is they contact their supervisor, the first liner. The first liner contacts the second liner. The second liner contacts the chief of the station. The chief of the station contacts some chief within sector. Some chief within sector has to send an email to the chief of the sector. The chief of the sector has to send it up to DC. The guy in DC has to contact someone in CBP. Someone in CBP has to contact the secretary. They have to give the okay to shoot it down, and now you got to wait for it to come back down. That takes over a day. The drone's no longer there, and that directive would be for that particular drone. So if the drone leaves and another one comes back, you got to go through the same steps. Now there's laws on the books right now, and I'll point out, I'm not trying to plug any company, but Axon came up with a way to be able to counterattack these drones with a drone that you're able to install tasers on them and different ways to deactivate another drone. But because of the laws on the book on how these new tasers that they developed are deployed, the new tasers have a piston system. This is right up your alley because you're the gun guy. They have a piston system and a primer in order to put out the projectile. Now, it's a less than lethal device, but the laws, the National Firearms Act, doesn't allow you to utilize it without registering it because it's got a primer and a piston. So now you can't utilize that because it's considered a gun, even though it's less than lethal, even though there's nothing there that you can retrofit to make it shoot a bullet, nothing like that. You have to try to figure out how to fix those laws in order to allow a lot of these equipments from individuals that are developing them to be utilized. So the cartels know that.
You're telling me that the great efficiency of government doesn't work worth a damn.
Pretty much. And like you said, we have laws that we have to follow, And I'm not against them, but I think that when we see these areas where we can change some type of law for the benefit of Americans and for the benefit of security, we should explore them a lot faster than we've been exploring them. You have the drug cartels; they utilize different radios to communicate, and they have scouts in the U.S. in our mountains that are seeing gathering intel, and they communicate back and forth, and they put these huge antennas on the Mexican side so they can communicate. Well, they're not bound by FCC rules, so they can transmit as much power in these antennas as they want. And you, as not even just an American citizen, but as a federal agent, there's eavesdropping laws. So I can't go to Radio Shack and listen to their conversation because there's an element of privacy I got to respect. These guys are smugglers. I should be able to utilize whatever I can on that border to be able to arrest these individuals that are causing harm to our national security.
So let me ask you a question that's been on my mind for a long time. Well over 20 years ago, I had private contact with some Border Patrol agents that wanted me to make a certain kind of ammo for their AR-15s. They were shooting fast twist barrels. The story they told me is they were paying for and modifying their own rifles. And so they would have fast twist barrels installed on these rifles so that they could shoot, let's say, a human target out to 500 or 600 yards with a 223 with heavy streamlined bullets. And I made several batches for these men that were paying for it out of their own pocket. And so they could do long range shooting, because their issue was that there was Middle Eastern terrorists coming over the Mexican border, the southern border, and they were here just to commit terroristic acts, and they were organized, and they knew that because some of the ones that they had shot or captured, they took the information off of them that proved basically that there was plans for terrorist attacks in America, and that's why these people were crossing the border. Now, I've been to Canada many times, and that border, like you pointed out, up around Maine is very remote. Well, not just from Maine, on the east coast of America, but all the way to the west coast.
Right.
That's mountainous terrain, forested terrain. There's no fences. There's nothing to stop anybody from coming into America. So do you see, honestly, I'm shocked that we haven't had more Middle East sponsored terrorist attacks in America than we have had, because of the border situation, not just the southern border, the northern border. Are you in agreement with what you've seen? Are you in agreement with that?
So there's a lot of factors, honestly, Tim, on that end. You often hear the term, you have to make sure you take care of the chicken coop. Don't let the wolf inside the chicken coop. I think that the wolf is already in the chicken coop, unfortunately, when it comes to America. There's way too many individuals. Like I said, when you're looking at millions that came across during the Biden administration, and when you look at the statistics that it's individuals from over 160 plus countries, and when I saw these groups that were coming across, but then when you look at the gotaways, it was so easy to come into the United States under the Biden administration and just claim asylum and get released, right? And essentially get lost in society and never show up to your court. But at the same time, you've got to remember, during that time, we had gotaways. Why would you have gotaways when you know it's easy to come across, ask for asylum, and get released? Those gotaways, and it was well over 1 million gotaways, Tim. I think we have a ton of individuals in this country from terrorist organizations that are already here. Now, it might be small cells throughout the United States. They're planning different things. It might be something to do with our crops. I don't know if we're going to see something to the horrific acts of 9/11, but I think it might be something that slowly and surely keeps ruining our country more and more. You look at the protests that you've been seeing in large cities like Portland, like Boston, like Chicago, like New York, where they're waving an ISIS flag. I mean, they're waving an ISIS. It's a terrorist organization, and you're seeing, hundreds upon thousands of people gather in our large cities waving it, and everyone's afraid to say something because they don't want to be, pointed as a racist or whatever it may be. So I think we have a lot of individuals that are going to cause harm to our country in the future, and they're causing it now because they entered the country already. So I agree with that. As far as, I don't like to touch on the agents and retrofitting some of the weapons because there's policies out there within the government, and you're supposed to not retrofit those weapons. But I mean, you would hear stories, and it happens, and a lot of it is. I was upset to a point when we went from 40. When I came into the Border Patrol, we would have what we would call the Tomahawks, which is the Beretta 40 cal, and that was a big gun. And I remember when I would be in plain clothes, I would conceal this Beretta, and I wouldn't have a problem with it, concealing it. And then you get spoiled, and we moved on to the H&Ks, and now, they utilize the Glocks. But when they went to Glocks, they went down from 40 cal to 9 millimeter. Now, there was a lot of things that were spoken about that. Some said, hey, the ballistics are the same. Other individuals said, it's cheaper to get them. There were studies, there were this, there was that. There was more capacity. I honestly, and I don't mean to sound like that guy, but I think a lot of it was because we started hiring individuals that maybe their wrists weren't as strong as they were before. I guess people didn't drink enough water out of the hose when they were children, so their system, developed differently.
Are you talking about DEI hires?
I'm not saying that, Tim. Don't say that to me. I'm just saying, there was individuals that the 40 was too much, so they went down to 9. So the government does that. They retrofit what they can. I know we have individuals out there like BORTAC, which is the tactical unit which within Border Patrol. They have different weapons that they're able to utilize. They have access to I think better weapons than other individuals within the patrol do, which makes sense. But definitely the big problem though that we need to look at and focus on is the bad guy doesn't have a budget. The bad guy doesn't have a budget on ammo, doesn't have a budget on weapons, and unfortunately, I think I saw many times where the bad guys had probably cooler and better weapons than the good guys, and that's a big problem.
They get to retrofit their weapons. They can have whatever they want.
Absolutely, that's the problem.
Oh man, well, I'm trying not to get depressed talking to you, Art.
You know what, Tim? So I speak all over the country, like I said, and when I'm done, everyone's really happy to see me, and they shake my hand, and then I go up there and speak, and they look at me, and they said, thanks for your information, but you're really depressing. I don't mean to be that way. I'm not a pessimist. I'm not an optimist. I'm a realist. And I tell people, you need to be aware. There's bad people. I've seen evil for over 30 years. I saw it working in a maximum security prison. I saw it throughout my whole career with the U.S. Border Patrol. Because I was blessed enough to be with the union, I responded to over 90% of all the use of force incidents. So I saw nothing but evil and bad. And people need to realize when you're at church, you need to be vigilant. When you're at the mall, you need to be vigilant. When you're at a grocery store, you need to be vigilant. Unfortunately, anywhere you are in this country, and you need to teach your children to be vigilant. There's people out there that truly, truly hate you. They don't know you, and they don't know what side of the aisle you voted on. They don't care what side of the aisle you voted on. They just don't like you because you're an American. Now you're seeing what's happened with the drug cartels in Mexico. They're in such a crunch and such a bind that they've pretty much put a green light on American citizens that travel in Mexico. And I still get messages from people saying, hey, is it safe to go? I don't know. Do you have a green light to get killed? You tell me if it's safe to go.
Art.
Sorry, Tim.
Well, and you know, my wife and I have traveled to Mexico several times. I grew up with, well, I don't know if you know where the Willamette Valley in Northwest Oregon is.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I grew up, and of course, back in those days, the whole valley was rural. Now it's golf courses and wineries and apartment complexes. But so most of the kids I grew up with were transient workers.
Right.
And, so I grew up all around Mexicans. Back then, at least probably the bulk of them were legal. And I don't know in the 70s and, I don't know what it took to be a legal immigrant versus now what it takes to be legal. But I like the Mexican culture. I have always liked the Mexican culture. And who else gets to have siesta? I mean,
absolutely, you're right.
well, no, that's a perfect practice. You get up early, you work, you go eat your lunch, take a little nap, cools down a little bit, you go work for a few more hours, call it a day.
No, you're right. Look, and that's where people I think confuse with some of the things I say. Look, I grew up in the Mexican culture. I did my whole life, and the Mexican food and everything there is within it. But people don't understand there's a difference between culture and citizenship and love of country. And I think that's where people. I mean, I have a lot of friends that are Italians, but they love America, and that doesn't mean they don't hate. I mean, they have their Italian culture, and
Sure.
But I think the difference is, and I'm going to say something that just upsets a lot of people, and I posted it on my Instagram. It's probably my most seen video on Instagram, and I get people from both sides that either like it or that really attack me. The difference is you had a lot of people in the 70s that came into the United States from Mexico per se. And they weren't here to stay. They wanted to make money and they wanted to go back to Mexico. And they had their children here in the United States. And these children grew up listening to their grandparents or their fathers and mothers telling them how great life was in Mexico. So unfortunately, they didn't instill in them a love for this country because their option wasn't to stay here, Tim. They wanted to go back to Mexico. They didn't want to stay here. Okay, so they didn't have an allegiance or loyalty to this country. And unfortunately, I think they passed that on to their kids who were now born in the United States. Okay, so now those kids are born in the U.S. They grow up hearing all these stories of how better it was in Mexico. They go vacation in Mexico, but they don't realize that there's still parts of Mexico that are very much a third world country. So they're not going to get accustomed to living there and the wages and the traffic and the the light electricity going away halfway through the day because of the surges or toilets not running correct. So they're not used to all that part of the Mexican areas, right? But they're now in the United States, and they almost developed an anger and a hatred towards America because they think Mexico was better. And then they go into the whole argument of, well, this is stolen land and the border didn't cross. No, I didn't cross the border crossed. They go into all those things. And then you watch TV shows where a lot of the Mexican movies, they use the Mexican guy as the guy that was in prison. So then now all of a sudden you got these Mexican guys in prison that are coming out talking about their fairy tales of Aztlan and the Aztec movement and all this kind. So they grow up around that type of language, so they don't develop a true love for America. And now they're out there protesting against. Make no mistake, Tim, they don't want to go back to Mexico. They just don't. But they want to be able to speak and say, oh, this is wrong. What is wrong? What is wrong? Embrace that you're in America. Be happy you're in America. Be happy that your parents brought you here, that you were born in the greatest country in the world. It's not perfect, but it is the greatest country in the world. That's why you have millions of people coming in here. So I say that to people, and they get upset, and they said, "Oh, you're a race traitor." Oh, and then I start getting the racial slurs. I start getting racial slurs, and I look at these people, and I said, "Wait a minute. So because you and me disagree, and I'm of Hispanic heritage, it's okay for you to be racially attacking me." That's what makes it so hypocritical. But I think that's where the big problem is. There's a lot of people that weren't taught to love this country growing up, and that's why we're seeing some of the issues that we see sometimes in the Hispanic culture.
Well, if you can't love the country you're in, and we're property owners in South Africa,
right?
And if you can't love the country you're in, you probably should get out. We love South Africa with all their struggles, political issues, but nonetheless, the people that we meet, some of them are very, very good humans.
Right.
And I suspect, I know a lot of people in Mexico that are the most spiritual, lovely, harmless people. It's a very spiritual culture. The old Mexican culture. I'm not talking drug dealers and cartels.
Absolutely.
I'm talking Mexican citizens born and raised. They're the most helpful, friendly, spiritual, loving people that you'll ever be around. But that's not who's coming here and causing problems.
That's the problem. And look, it goes back to we mentioned people that were coming from Ukraine at the time. During the Biden administration, when the war going on with the Ukraine and Russia, we were arresting individuals from Russia and from the Ukraine on the border. I can tell you they got along pretty well when they were detained together. There was no issues between them then.
Interesting. Well, governments manipulate the people so they can have control and maintain power, when in fact most humans left to their own devices are good people.
Absolutely.
That's, we see that worldwide. Governments take control of the people, and they stir the race baiting, they stir the rich against the poor, and create classes. And I'm no more a Republican than I am a Democrat. I'm a lover of freedom. I'm a lover of humanity. Does that mean that I'm not looking at reality? Not at all. If I need to kill someone to defend my wife or to defend any innocent person, I'm more than capable and more than willing. I wish it didn't have to be that way.
Right, I say that all the time. I tell people, look, law enforcement doesn't wake up in the morning, grab their gear, and say, let's see whose rights I'm going to violate or who I'm going to shoot today.
No.
That's not how it works. But some people think that's how it is.
Yeah, well, it isn't. And I'm very skeptical of some law enforcement because they're humans, not because they're law enforcement. They're humans, and you know how humans can be co-opted.
So that's an interesting point. Look, Tim, like I said, I speak in a lot of groups, and they ask me, so what can we do to defend ourselves? And I tell people, look, exercise the Second Amendment, buy a gun, train, get the proper training, and continue to train. Don't just buy it, train once, and put it in your drawer. You got to continue to train. It's your right to defend yourself. Continue to do that. And then individuals will look at me and say, well, you're in law enforcement. Most law enforcement, and I don't know who they talk to, right? Because not the ones I talk to. And they say, well, most law enforcement we talk to say, hey, lock your doors, call 911. And I'm thinking, look, I'm not going to tell you that because I've been in law enforcement, in real law enforcement, okay? I wasn't, out there in Mayberry with one bullet in my pocket. I've seen evil, and evil doesn't sleep. And American citizens, you need to be prepared on how to defend your life, because maybe by the time you call 911 and someone shows up, it's too late, and you can't allow it to get to that point. So I always tell people, learn to defend yourself, exercise your rights, get the proper training, get the proper weapon, get the proper ammunition. You know more than anyone else on that end. That's a big deal, and I think that's my big point, because people always say, "What can we do? What can we do?" Look, you are your best 911. That's what it comes down to. You be your first responder.
Yeah, it's supposed to be that way. We're supposed to be independent thinkers. We're not supposed to rely on the government to wipe our nose and wipe our butt.
Right.
And, I mean, that's not the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be the defender of yourself and your family, and frankly, anyone else that is an innocent potential victim. That's what we're supposed to be doing is looking after one another. I do have something I want to talk about. You brought up last night, you didn't ask me to do this or anything, but last night you said you're going to start your own YouTube channel. And I want you to elaborate. You didn't tell me much. You just said you're going to start your own YouTube channel next week, I think you said.
Yeah, so it should be coming up, this month for sure. It's going to be called 5 Strands with Art Del Cueto. And it's not because I'm bald. It's not 5 strands of hair. So people don't get that idea. I came up with the name 5 Strands because the original line of demarcation in the southern border with the U.S. and Mexico was 5 strands of barbed wire. And so that's why I came up with the name 5 Strands with Art Del Cueto. It's you can find it already on YouTube, but I only have one clip on there, of coming soon and what I'm going to be talking about. I did have a podcast before but that was under the umbrella of the National Border Patrol Council. I left, so I don't have that podcast anymore. I was on Spotify, I was on iHeart, but I want to be able to continue to do that. I want to be able to continue to spread the word. And as I said earlier, there's too many guys out there that, with 2-3 years in, come down here and they spread information that isn't necessarily true. And a lot of them do it for the shock value. Look, we can't point the finger at one political party and say that's fake news, and then turn around and use the same tactics so we can get a following. I've never subscribed to that thought process, so that's why I'm starting what's called the 5 Strands with Art Del Cueto. It's going to be on podcast. I'm not going to be on. It's going to be on YouTube. I'm going to continuously be putting out different stories. Some of them may be in my home. Some of them may be out there. And I'll film them in the desert itself on the U.S.-Mexican border, just so people are properly informed, because I think this immigration issue is not going to go away. And like you said, there's a lot of obstacles that President Trump is facing. We're coming up on midterms, so we don't know where we're going to land after that. It's a serious issue, and people need to be informed, truly informed, not just informed by those out there trying to just provide shock value.
Well, hopefully people will look for it, and I'm pretty sure coming from you, it's going to address real issues. Like you said, you didn't work 2 years at the Border Patrol, and now you're an expert. And you said something just before we started this podcast, as we were speaking to each other. You said after all these years, decades now in Border Patrol and all the positions that you've served, you still don't consider yourself an expert. And I get that, because in ballistics, with external ballistics, internal ballistics, terminal ballistics, with everything that's going on and all the different manufactured firearms, I learn something new every day.
Right.
I mean, I hate to even use the word expert in, relativity to myself. But if I'm not one, well, I guess I don't know who is one. But that doesn't mean squat, because you are learning new things all the time, ever improving. And I know that's where you're at just from talking to you. I know
it's like a knife, Tim, and you know it. Look, if I have a knife and I'm using it every day, I got to sharpen it every once in a while, right? And if you just don't, It's going to be a dull knife. And I think that's where I stand. That's why I still go out to the border. I still see what's going on. I wrap myself in anything that's coming out. I talk to the agents. I talk to the leadership. Now that I'm not in the union, I talk to the leadership more than I did before, right? They're willing to talk to me and move forward. Yeah. because we need to know that, and you need to expand, and you need to pretty much, you got to pay attention to who's real and who's full of it, right? I think that's where you come in play for me. I've been seeing your channel for quite some time. I think you have amazing information that you put out. Look, we've talked about it. My bullet of choice is 45 and 9 millimeter, right? And I love 9. I trained with 40 for a long time, and I got a ton of 40. So it's not, it's 45, it's 9, it's 45, it's 40. But I utilize whatever tool I need depending on where I'm going. And I get up in the morning early. I go running. I can't run around with my big gun around, so I take a smaller gun and I shoot 380. And because of you, and I think I've shared your channel, I don't know how many times already, but that particular one on the 380 was very important. I didn't know that. You hear people say, "Oh, use this bullet because it expands," and then I listened to you, and you made sense. And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Look, I've been carrying on around the wrong 380 bullets my whole life." But it's so you learn those things, and if people don't subscribe to what I got moving forward right now, I'm available on Instagram. I'm available on X. I'm more vocal and more easily accessible on Instagram right now, and that's why I want to push 5 strands with Art Del Cueto. But if you don't subscribe to those and you try to learn, then you're stuck, and you're really not going to learn anything. How many people are out there? And I hate to do this to you and put you on the spot, right? But Tim, how many people? No, how many people are out there running around with 380 hollow points, not knowing that they're probably better off with full metal jackets?